It has been so long since I've created an abandoned miniature scene. And then I came across this channel literally called Abandoned Miniatures, and I was completely inspired. I ended up talking with Nick from that channel about creating abandoned scenes, and we ended up coming up with this video idea. This is going to be a challenge collab where we challenge ourselves to create one realistic photograph at the very end of building a scene that looks like it could be a real abandoned place. I will put some of the rules to this challenge on the screen now so you can kind of see what our parameters were. But I really enjoyed this process, and I will leave a link to Nick's video on the channel Abandoned Miniatures in the description box below so you can see his version of the challenge. Yes, this is what the outside of my project looks like, but I promise you the inside is much more interesting. So let's get started. I'm going to be using this really beautiful photograph by Ash Romano of this abandoned room for my main inspiration. I will leave a link to her Instagram account in the description box as well. I really like this photo. I like the simplicity of just a single chair, single table, single window against the complexity of all the wallpaper that had fallen on the floor. I think it's a trick of the lens that it looks like the walls are angling out from the window, but I decided to go ahead and build that into my room. So instead of my walls being 90-degree angles, I'm going to angle them out just a little bit. This way, when I take my photographs, you can still see a bit of that angle. I'm also building this side wall, and I kind of had to guess what the rest of this room might look like. All I really did was add a single wall and make this a very small space. Of course, I needed to stay within the 12 by 10 inch parameters that we put on this challenge. I'm building out of cardboard because I just missed building out of cardboard and I had a lot of it sitting around. This is what my space ended up looking like, and I'm just taping it together to get a feel for it. And because I have a few complicated angles, the tape really helps me not commit to anything yet and be able to cut and paste where I need to. I went ahead and built one chair just to get a feel for the proportions of this room to make sure I'm getting everything right. This is a shorter room than normal. It's not an 8-foot ceiling height, but I do think this might be an attic space. So I'll tell you more about the chair later. But here's what I've got going so far, and at the moment I'm pretty happy with it. I decided to double up my cardboard walls. This will make them stronger, and then I'm also making sure that the corrugation is going opposite directions. This will continue to strengthen it. Once I have all my walls doubled, I can go ahead and start my final construction. I am going to be putting this together with hot glue, and to be honest, the outside of this piece is not going to look great at the beginning. I do think down the line I might add some siding and possibly some shingles at some point, but the point of this project was the interior, so that's what I'm focusing on. Now that I have a solid structure, I can go ahead and create the patterns for my wallpaper. I'm going to be using some dollar store poster board for this purpose, and all I'm doing is cutting strips that I know will be tall enough for the wall and then marking out where the fold is going to be. This is going to make it easy in the corner areas so that everything looks cohesive and I don't have any big gaps that might be left by the cardboard. So all I'm doing is making sure that it fits inside, and then I can start marking out the areas that I'm going to have to cut. The window hole is going to be the most important one to line up, so once I know I have that correct, I can go around and mark out the rest of the top of the walls and the side of the walls so that once I'm done, I have one piece that will wrap around that entire area, covering 3 of the walls. This is how it looks once it is inserted. This will make it easier for me to work on a flat surface and not have to work inside the model. This will also help mask the texture of the cardboard walls. Sometimes cardboard can leave dimpling on your wallpaper, and the poster board will take care of that. I went ahead and covered the rest of the walls so I knew I had everything ready to go when I started my wallpaper. Once it's installed, all of these walls will be covered. If you watch my cardboard house series, you know what time it is. It is time to cover the edges with some joint compound and let it dry. At this point, I was ready to get working on the wallpaper, which is probably the biggest job in this entire project. This was one reason I was really happy to do it on a flat piece of poster board instead of trying to work on the walls within the project. There's several layers to these walls, which I want to point out so you understand why I'm doing what I'm doing. At one point, the walls were painted green. You can see some areas where the green is showing through. And then there is what I think to be a underlayer of the wallpaper. I could be wrong, this could be a whole nother wallpaper that was previously put on, but I think there is a dark blue layer that has peeled off to reveal an under part of the wallpaper that still has some of the ink from the original printing on it. So it looks like there's two different wallpapers, but really it's one wallpaper that has split over time, and you can still see the remaining ink on the wall. Whether that's accurate or not, that's what I decided to go with. I ended up having to draw this wallpaper because I couldn't find something close enough for my liking, and I really liked the little bows and flowers that you could see when you zoomed in on the original photograph. Before I can do anything with these wallpaper templates, I'm going to have to sand the back of the poster board. It does have a little bit of a shine on it, and whenever something has a shine or a gleam, I like to make sure and sand it so when I glue it in, my glue takes hold. I tried to find a green paint that I thought would work for the wall color that's underneath all the wallpaper. I just put green paint wherever I thought the wall would peek through. Later on, I regret this and I wish I had painted the whole thing, and you'll see why. I printed out the top layer of blue wallpaper on just plain printer paper, and I printed the under layer on construction paper because it will be a little bit fuzzier and look more like a paper that's had the top ripped off of it. So this is an up close of the pattern once I shrunk it down and repeated it on the wallpaper. On the back of it, I decided to use some watercolor paints to age it a little bit. I feel like this was a little bit of an unnecessary step. I could have done this beforehand, before I printed on it, or I could have just aged it once it was in my project. I did kind of risk ripping it a little bit doing it this way. I went ahead while the other paper was drying. I decided to cut this paper into strips. I like to work in strips of wallpaper because I feel like it gives it a more realistic look once I start peeling it off. I also cut off some extra sheets of this construction paper because I knew that this pattern was going to cover most of the wall. Here you will probably start to see immediately why I should have painted the entire wall green. I couldn't see it at the time until I started aging everything, but you will be able to see where the green is and where it is not. In order to start sticking down the construction paper, I added some Mod Podge and then just laid the construction paper on top and then pressed it down. This made it really easy for areas where I wanted the green to show through. In those areas, I just didn't put any Mod Podge. I left an area dry, and then everything else was covered. If I had covered the entire thing with green paint, I think it would have been harder to find these areas again where there were dry spots where I wanted to rip everything off. But as it was, I pretty much knew where they were because I ended up being able to see the green paint through the construction paper. Once everything was completely dry, I could just go back and literally rip the paper off the wall. The Mod Podge held on really tightly, so it was just easy to do. This was the first time I was working with construction paper, and so I wanted to try out a few experiments. I got some sandpaper because I know that would probably rough it up, but decided to add water on top of that because I knew water would eat into the construction paper really quickly, and it did. It messed up the top of that paper really well, so much so that it made me a little bit nervous, and I went back to dry sandpaper. What the sandpaper is doing is just taking off the top layer, the top printed layer, so that it's fading out that paper just a little bit more. I don't want the print to look perfect because it's just supposed to be staining from the ink from the top layer of the wallpaper. I did find that the wet sandpaper technique was really helpful in the areas where I wanted to completely take off the paper so that the green would show through. Once I was done with ripping all the areas off, I went back with some watercolor paint and started aging the paper a little bit more. The printer did put a little bit of a yellowy ink on there, but I wanted it a little bit more brown. In the end, I do think it turned out a bit too orange, but this is all, just a fun experiment, I think. Here you can really see the green shining through, but luckily once it dried, it kind of hid itself again. And because I knew I had another layer to put on, I wasn't worrying about it too much. When I reference back to the original picture, I can tell that there's really not a lot of this top layer of wallpaper left on the wall. It's just little tiny bits here and there, and most of it is on the floor. So instead of putting all of the blue wallpaper on the wall and then ripping it off, I'm going to be pre-ripping it and just gluing little bits here and there. I'm being mindful of where the edge of the wallpaper would be and trying to think that those would probably be the most glued areas and those would kind of hang on. I am referencing the photo to try and put wallpaper in those areas as well, but I also kind of went with my instinct on what I thought would look the best. As I'm going along, I'm using my fingernail to pull up the edges, so it does look like the remaining wallpaper is still trying to pull away from the wall. I'm using some of that same watercolor to go around the edges and build up a little bit of grime that's kind of got stuck on that wallpaper glue that's underneath that top layer. Here's how it's looking on this first wall panel. I did the other two walls very similarly, except they ended up with a little bit more blue wallpaper on them. Once they're all dry, I can go ahead and stick them into the project. This ended up being a balancing act of building up some books so that I had a flat surface to lay my 1, 2, 3 blocks on top of the paper once I had it glued in place. I'm working with the center wall first because that is the one that has to line up with the other walls in that small area that I added on, and so that has to be the most exact. Then I'm going to work my way around to the window because that is another important part so that it fits around the window hole, and then I will eventually go to the big wall on the side. This isn't a difficult process, but it is one that takes a lot of time and patience so that you can make sure that the glue is fully dried and holding on before moving on to that next wall and making sure that you get it as snug into the project as possible. Once I had all the walls in, I could go ahead and make a floor pattern, and then I'm going to transfer that again to a piece of poster board. This is a really simple floor that I'm going to be making. In the photograph, it looks like a painted wood floor, and all I'm going to be doing is taking some strips of cardstock. I think these are about 1/4 inch wide. I'm going to glue them just in a line going all the way across. I'm not really worried about making little horizontal breaks in the floor because a lot of it's going to be covered by clutter, and so I'm just not even worrying about that. Once I have everything glued down, it's a real simple process of just cutting the excess off, and then I'm going to use some acrylic paint to go over the top. It's important that I glue everything down really, really well, or else during this paint process it will start to pop up anywhere where the glue is not holding. I'm also going to cover everything in a layer of Mod Podge to seal it and give it just the tiniest bit of shine. You can see a few little areas where it's popped up, but for an older floor, I'm okay with that. To dull it down just a little bit, I gave it a nice sand, and I'm really happy with the result. And I do end up fixing that one little white spot on the edge. So now I can glue it into my project and make sure that it is flat against the floor. Next, it was time to focus on the baseboards, which is typically something I kind of glance over a lot and just stick a wooden stick there. But since I'm going for realism, I wanted to put in the same detail that I was seeing in the photograph, which was it looked like there was a line of detail across the top, and I didn't think that would be very difficult to add with an awl. So I just pulled it along the top, and then I rounded the top of the baseboards to create what I saw in the photograph.
I painted it with some acrylic paint, and then it was ready to install. Installing baseboards is always a little annoying and difficult, especially with these angles, but it's worth it in the end because it covers up any gaps you have in between your wallpaper and your floor. My Easy Cutter was super helpful in this process. I always like to bring up that tool when I can because it really helps my hands. And here's how the interior is looking so far.
One of the main focal points of this entire room is the window. Thankfully, one of the rules we laid out in this challenge is you can use whatever machines you want. And y'all know I love my laser cutter.
Thankfully, the original photograph was pretty straight on with the window, so I could pull it into Inkscape and pretty much trace it in order to recreate the same look. Of course, I also had to make a few changes to make sure that it was 3D and fit in my project, but after I got all of that figured out, I just had to cut it in the laser cutter. Here's what it looked like once it was done. I like to put tabs on them so they stay in the mat board sheet. This just keeps it from dropping inside the laser cutter machine. After I painted it, I could pop out the pieces and start to assemble them inside the room. This is going to be the windowsill. This piece just gets wedged inside the window, and the U shapes on either end go around the wall, so it looks like it's inside and both outside. Hopefully, when I get time to do the outside of the project, the window will look good out there as well. I'm making the frame and popping that into place. It does have an interior frame, so it covers up the inside edges of the cardboard. Making sure everything is as straight as possible and then gluing it in place. I wanted to continue what was in the original photograph where there are not corners on the edges of the frames because it goes into the ceiling, so I just cut those off. For the window panes themselves, I'm going to be doing a technique that I've done in past videos where I kind of blur out the windows, but you can't really tell that they're blurred out. They still look clear. I'm using some recycled packaging and sanding down both sides with some sandpaper. Then I'm going to glue on my frames. This is one side, I think they're like doors that open the window, so there's two of them. And then the other parts that are going to be glued on the back are in the house, you can see on the screen. So I'm going to be cutting them out so that the plastic is the same exact size as the window, and then I'm gluing the counterpart or the outside part of the window onto the other side. So now it's kind of a frame sandwich with the plastic in between. Once those are dry, I'm going to be adding UV resin to both sides of the window pane. I'm spreading it out with a toothpick very carefully, not to get it on my skin, and then I can cure it with a UV light. I'm starting far away from it and then slowly getting closer. If you start too close, it could warp your plastic. To make it look like clear glass, you're going to have to do this on both sides of the window. But because we sanded it, now once you get further away from the window, the details blur. This will make your photographs look more realistic when you're photographing something in miniature because you won't see a life-size house in the background. I also added a little pull for the door, and now our doors are ready to go into the window frame. I'm adding in one door at a time to let the glue take hold, and once they're in, that window is finished. I'm not even sure you'll be able to see the little window pull in there once the photograph is taken, but I like it. It makes me happy, so that works. Before I add the ceiling on, and while I still have easy access to the walls, I'm going to add some chalk pastel, and this is just going to dirty up the walls a little bit more. I felt like it needed it in the corners around the window, and after that, here's how it's looking now.
I also ended up using my laser cutter for the chair and table. Now I will probably make these into kits for my store, and I will go into more fine detail on these pieces probably on my kits channel. So for now in this video, I did want to show you how they went together. It's kind of an abbreviated version, but hopefully you can get an idea of all the pieces and how everything fits.
This chair was another piece I made specifically for this project. I sketched it out and then put it into a vector program to try and get the correct shape that I was seeing in the original photograph. Basically, this whole pattern works on double layers of mat board, and one of the layers has these little holes in it, and those are eventually going to have toothpicks to be the rungs on the chair that help support the legs. These are the only two pieces that don't have a double layer of mat board. They are going to be the side pieces or the side rails that hold the front and the back of the chair together. I'm gluing them in place in little notches that I made for them to sit, and then I can glue the front of the chair onto those side rungs to create the complete frame of the chair. I'm making sure that the circles face in so that there's a place for the toothpicks to rest once I put them in. After that's dry, I can add the seat of the chair, which is also a double layer of mat board, and that will help keep everything nice and strong. Once that's glued together, I can take my toothpick and then I'm going to cut it down so that it's the correct size to span between the front and the back legs of the chair. I'm cutting 2 of those at the exact same size. I think the chair in the original photo also has rungs that go between the front 2 legs and the back 2 legs, but for my replica here, I'm pretty happy with these. I'm using a Dremel to round off the edges of the mat board, and this is just going to give the chair a little bit more of a worn look. Then I can coat the entire thing in brown acrylic paint, of course, to give it the look of wood, and this is how it is looking so far. I'm pretty happy with it, but I want to add some more chalk pastel. I think everything in this project is getting some layer of chalk pastel somewhere, and I really think this just gives it different tones to make it look like an older chair and give it a little bit more interest. I'm spraying it with some Mr. Super Clear, which will dull it down a little bit, and you can see the result up in the corner. In the photo, the chair has a cushion, so I quickly made a green cushion for it and glued it in place. You can see I made 2 of them. One of them is going to end up in the other side of the room. I also wanted to create the table that's near the chair, and this again is working in layers. The front of the table that has the drawer opening is 3 layers, and the back of the table is also 3 layers. This is building up the bulk of the table legs. And just like the chair, I have 2 side rails that are going to span between the front and the back of the table to create the frame. The rectangle you see still on the mat is going to go in the very bottom, creating the underside of the table and making a place for the drawer to rest. Once all that's dry, I can take a larger rectangle and turn the entire thing upside down and glue the table down to it so that I now have a tabletop. I made the small drawer off screen, and then I took a Dremel and I rounded the edges of this furniture as well. I have a tiny little knob for the front of the drawer, and this is how it fits into the table. I decided to paint the table a slightly different brown because it didn't look in the photograph like these 2 pieces were supposed to go together, and so I wanted to make them look a little bit different in some way.
So once I was done messing with the interior, it was time to put on the roof, also known as the ceiling.
The roof is made of 2 pieces of cardboard that I taped together and tested to make sure that they fit really well over all of the area I had been previously working on. I wanted to make sure that they fit really tight so there wasn't any light coming through once the roof was on. I also took a wood dowel and put it over the very top line of the roof. I'm hoping this will help support it a little bit because I ended up just doing 1 layer of cardboard for these, and I want the top part of this project to be strong. I'm using hot glue to secure it in place. Again, this isn't the most beautiful solution, but it is holding the roof down very securely, and I'm happy with it so far. Now it's time to work on these ceilings. So the ceiling is really important in the original photograph. There's light bouncing off of the ceiling, so I want to make sure and give that part of my project as much attention as the walls. I'm using some Post-its to protect my previous work as I spread the joint compound directly onto the cardboard. This is what's going to create my ceiling that is going to go straight up to the edges from side to side and hopefully make everything come together. It's going to start out with somewhat of a rough texture, but I will sand it down once everything dries. This is a really easy way to protect your wallpaper with the Post-its, and then you can reuse them in other parts of your project because they'll remain sticky for a while. I did the same exact process on the ceiling that's over by the window, and this was the result. As I said, it is a little bit more textured than I wanted, but it was pretty easy to sand. I just took regular sandpaper and started working in small circles to try and get it as even as possible. Just make sure that you're protecting your lungs and cleaning up your workspace once you're done. Moving on to the texture I want to create, I'm first going to seal the surface that I just created with some white acrylic paint. You can't see it here because it's white on white, but this is giving me a better surface to work on for the next technique I want to try. I learned this technique from Abandoned Miniatures channel. I am going to be using, well, this is watercolor masking fluid. Nick uses, I think, liquid latex. It's kind of the same thing. I don't know, but it did work. It took the jaws of life to get it open, but it did work. I am using kind of a brush that I don't care about because it will kind of junk up your brush, and I'm going to be taking the latex material and putting it all over the roof or the ceiling wherever I want to see peeling. This is going to create a barrier so that when I do my next layer of paint, I can easily peel it off. Nick makes this look super easy, which honestly it was really easy. I didn't have as easy of a time peeling it off, but that could also be because I'm working with like years old masking fluid. So definitely look up the stuff he uses for this process over what I'm using. I'm going over everything with a layer of like a cream colored paint. I think it's called buttermilk. And I'm just going to cover up everything, my previous ceiling surface and the areas that are covered with the liquid latex substance. Then when everything is dry, I can go back and start peeling at those areas that has the latex. It took me a little while to get all of the areas off, and even I think there's some that I just left there because the lumps and bumps looked really cool too. But taking the time to really work at it was worth the effect that it gave. Because I used a cream color on top of a white color, it wasn't showing up all that much, so I took some chalk pastel and just very, very, very lightly dusted it over the edges, and this made it look like those edges had kind of collected some dust and grime and really made them show up on the ceiling. I also added some chalk pastel along the edges, which just dirtied up the ceiling just a little bit more. I didn't want to go too much, just a little bit. Now it's time to add all of this peeling wallpaper that I peeled off originally back onto the floor. I wanted to play around with the furniture to see how I wanted everything set up. I knew I wanted the table and chair in their original spot from the original photograph, but then I had this whole other half of the room to play with as well. I did notice that the wallpaper looked a little bit too fluffy. It needed to be weighed down a little bit, and that's when I realized I was going to have to glue every single piece of this wallpaper to the floor so that it had the correct look to it. So each piece I glued down individually. I didn't want to just slather my floor with glue because I really liked the effect that it had. So each piece individually, and then I went back and aged it with the watercolor so it had the appropriate look to it.
At this point, I had pulled out so much detail from that original photograph that I was ready to do something a little bit different to make this entire room my own project. I have this little extra space over here, which you can't see in the original photograph, and I wanted to do something in miniature to bring these spaces together and kind of start telling my own story.
I started going through my miniature collection and found these old photographs that I had paid for and printed a long time ago. And I also went ahead and printed off my original photograph inspiration, and I decided to kind of create this photographer space since this whole challenge is about photography. I wanted to have these photos hanging on a line that's going across the entire room. I created tiny little pegs by using folded strips of paper that we're going to clamp onto the top of the photographs and hold them onto this thin string that's going across the room. I just added some glue, folded them over, and made it look like they were holding onto either side of the photo. As I did this, I could go across the line and add a few pictures here and there. I knew that if this room was going to look like an actual room full of old photography, that some of these photos were going to have to be rolled and have the corners kind of folded up a little bit, because with change in temperature and just neglected over time, these things happened. I also had to go back and paint each of those little strips of paper brown to look like actual wood clips that are holding the photographs onto the line. Once everything was dry, I could hang it into my space, and I really think it gave purpose to this little side room on the edge. I also wanted to add a few little nature elements, and so I wanted to try this technique of using acetone glue. I'm using Fabrifix to create these spider webs. Basically, you just kind of put a glob of it on some paper and then let it kind of string as you pull it up, and that creates these very fine spiderweb looking strings. I couldn't get the glue bottle actually in my project, so I used a stick to wrap it around some of the photos and wrap it around the line. My hope is that the light coming in the photo will kind of catch some of these tiny little spider webs and look like maybe this place has been abandoned for a while. Now it was time to really focus on the lighting, which is one of the biggest parts of photography. I added a reflective piece down underneath the window so it would reflect the light like I saw in the original photo up on the ceiling of the project. Thankfully, my lights have a few knobs where I can change the color temperature and the intensity, and so that was really helpful to try and figure out what I wanted in my project. I used both my phone and my camera. I was really rusty on my camera skills, so I was glad to have my phone, and in the end, I came up with a final photo.
I want to say a big thank you to Nick from Abandoned Miniatures for inspiring this collab. I had so much fun getting back into creating an abandoned scene, and it's really got me wanting to do more. Make sure to check out Nick's video. The link is in the description box. I saw his final photograph and was absolutely blown away. I'm constantly inspired by the things he's doing. So if you loved abandoned miniatures or miniatures at all, make sure you check out his channel. So that's all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye. Okay, so this is what actually happened. Nick sent me the email to show me his final photograph that he chose, but I thought he was sending me his inspiration photo. And I was like, oh, that's cool. And I was sitting there wondering, how is he going to make that texture, and how is he going to do this? And he had already made it. That was his final photograph. So yeah, it took me a second. And I looked like an idiot on email because I was like, oh cool, I can't wait to see it. And he had already sent it to me.